All right, we are going to get this kicked off. Just to kind of do a quick intro, I'm Brian Dempsey, Power Baseball, Eric Lassiter, right there on your screen. And then, of course, this is Shane Greene. You guys are going to get to hear him speak quite a bit about tonight. And just where to jump right to it. This program is something that Eric, Jesse, myself have always talked about the difference between the high level performers and the guys that are just basically participating. The difference is the mental, emotional side of it, the maturity, the perspective on failure, what's important, all that, and basically how to become a professional. You've heard the minute and a half version of Shane's story, and I can tell you that me and Shane have grown up together. We've known each other our whole lives. Was high school teammates with him. We talk about all the time about how the best player at 14U isn't always the best player at 16U, isn't always best player at 18U. And I can tell you, I was a lot better than Shane in high school, but I think he won in the long run. Okay. We're not fabricating. His role was to rake the mound one year. But people used to ask me all the time about Shane, and they were expecting to hear, he was the one that pitched us to the regional finals when he wasn't, when really I told him, guys, he really wasn't that good. But what he was is he was the ultimate teammate. He was bought into whatever his role was. There was just so many qualities that he still possesses that none of us are surprised that played with him, that even though he was kind of down on the depth chart back then, he really just kind of kept working, and he was the guy that you kind of didn't bet against. So nobody kind of saw us having the career that he was going to have. But obviously he has had a super uber successful one. And I can tell you, I was there every step of the way through college, and the kind of crazy draft story and the minor leagues and the ups and downs. And I can tell you that the conviction that he had in what he was going to do, even though he was always the underdog, was this separator. And over the years, I'm going to kind of tip it off the last here for a second on some of his experiences at Windermere, when Shane kind of spent a good part of their season one year as he was kind of trying to get re-signed, and the impact he had on those guys. But I can just tell you that this guy's was never the guy, and he really wasn't. And even in professional baseball, but everyone you've ever talked to that's played with a guy and you just kind of spend some time around him, you see what's different about him is something that's here and here. And the great part about that is that takes zero talent. It just being about being trained to strengthen this and strengthen this and your perspective. So, and that's why we know that this impact can happen so much, because irrelevant of whatever your kid's talent level is, everybody can get stronger here. Everybody can get here. And there's no better person to mentor a guy, a high school player, through this process to help them have the mindset of a pro than Shane Greene. So I'm going to kick it off to last before we kick it off to Shane to kind of talk a little bit.
Yeah, to kind of kick off or to build off of what Demp said, he was with us every day, and we've had a lot of big leaguers come and work out with us through the years, from Apopka all the way on to Windermere. And he was the only one that when he came, he said, I just want to do what every other guy's doing. And I've never seen anything like it. And our players bought into him so quickly because of it. Even some stuff that we did that probably wasn't the most fun for our team nor him, going through a whole PFP series every day. You saw in the clip, it was something I used to joke with him about. I watched his outing with the Yankees that day when he launched the ball into the stands and all of those things. And to see him build off of that and become the player that he ended up being in the big leagues was huge. But the impact that he had on our players was awesome. The pitchers, he got to talk to them about different sequences and what actually winning is. It's not always your ERA or your strikeouts to walks. There's different things you need to look at to know that you're having success and that you're doing the right things, and how to react when you fail, which is the biggest thing. And obviously he's done that throughout his career and been able to build off of it and become, an all-star like he was. And not only with the pitchers, because I know that's something that almost everybody thinks of is like, oh, well, he was a pitcher. Well, the impact that he had on guys like Ty Head and Blake Sear and some of the guys on our offense, because he's able to talk to them about mindset. And mindset doesn't change if you're a pitcher, a hitter, any of those things, not just about approach and what you're looking for, things like that. But again, when you fail, what are you going to do? And how are you going to fix it? And the impact that he had on our team was tremendous. I don't think it's just coincidence that, after he was with us and they got to see how he worked and what he considered to be success and failure wasn't always wins and losses at given times. And I think that is a huge thing that contributed to our success at Windermere. throughout the next few years after that. Our guys always considered him, an honorary Windy boy, they called him, because we know he went to Eastridge. But he showed up to our games to support them. He talked to them after games when we didn't play well, and I was probably about to lose my mind. So it helped me as a coach too, being able to hear his thoughts. Something I haven't told him because I didn't want to give him that much credit, but he can hear it now. But a lot of times I would be losing my mind, and he would say two sentences to me, and it would change what I was going to do at practice or how I was going to do it. And the impact that I saw it had on our team was outstanding. So I think that this is something that I know if I had a player, whether it was a baseball player, a soccer player like I have now, I would be utilizing Shane to the best of my ability. And I talk to him every morning that I'm in the facility about things like that now, because his insight is so good, and it's rare to have a guy with that mindset that who's had that kind of success. So I think he can help any player, not even just a baseball player, but I think this is where we should start, because he does have ties, obviously, leading up to the big leagues and being an all-star, and the guys are going to look up to him and respect what he has to say.
So,
First things first, I think the most important thing to understand here as a baseball player or a baseball parent that's never talked about is how difficult the game is. I mean, it's the hardest game in the world because it's the only game in the world that you can do everything right and be the worst player on the field today, and do everything wrong and be the best player on the field today. So with that comes, the results based mindset. Just because you were the best player on the field today doesn't mean anything, because you could have done everything wrong, right? And by that I mean, um, I can hang three curveballs and strike a guy out to win the game, and I could also throw the perfect curveball down and away and give up a homer to lose the game. But if I throw that same curveball in the perfect spot every time I throw it forever, chances are I'm going to be successful. But if I hang every curveball I ever throw forever, chances are I'm not going to be successful, right? So if you're riding the roller coaster of the successes and the failures day to day, um, essentially you're never going to get any better because you don't know what to get better at, in a sense, right? And then you have the people like, I play with Miguel Cabrera, for example, probably the most talented hitter of all time, but um, for sure the best hitter of all time. But he's also the only hitter you've ever seen strike out and give the pitcher a thumbs up, you know? So the way he dealt with failure was different than everybody else. So how do you know that that's not why he was the best hitter of all time? So things like that, it's again, and Brian, I think you touched on this. At some point, the talent on the field is going to be here. And so you got to figure out how to separate yourself from the talent, and it's going to come to the brain and the heart. And, um, you know, I know that my strength is being relatable and getting the player to understand what's going on from a different perspective, because that's what helped me the most. I knew that I wasn't the most talented player on the field, so I had to figure out other ways to um, separate myself and then be able to zoom out. So in a way that it was like, if I do this every time forever this way, even though it's not working now, 10 years from now, where will I be? Because especially at the youth level, like I said, getting so caught up in the day-to-day failure and success, you can barrel three balls and be 0 for 3, or you can have three infield singles with two RBIs. And it's like, which one are we really focused on, you know?
you know,
To that point, Shane, I have we've been talking quite a bit every morning, and I know that you've been working with a couple minor league hitters. I think it would be pretty cool to hear that story of what you're doing with those guys and just some of the experience there, because I know it's very similar to what you're kind of describing now.
Yeah.
And again, I know they're calling you, so I think it's a good thing to point out that these guys are hitters, not pitchers, and they're calling you to work through some things similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah, so those guys specifically are at the AA and AAA level, and um, basically what they were doing was riding the roller coaster of the successes and the failures, right? So after diving in a little deeper with each of them, what I figured out was, you know, they were they were both kind of in like the can't catch a break mentality. So we tried to figure out like, okay, then what are we really focused on, right? So we came up with a scenario where for the next month, the only thing we're going to talk about is barrels. And then we had to figure out like what is a barrel? Well, they have access to exit velocity and launch angle and all these other things. So we came up with what we thought or what we considered was a barrel with exit velocity and the launch angle, and we said this is the only thing that matters, and let's see who can have more of them between the two of them, and created a little competition between the two. But little things like that, focusing on the things that matter, right? We're like, if you hit every ball forever at 100 miles an hour, probably going to get a lot of hits,
Yeah.
right? But if you're focused so much on the result of the hit, it's there's too many variables involved there, especially as you get higher up in the levels, because then you're going to have shifts. You're going to have, there's going to be no secret at what pitch you can't hit. There's going to be no secret in what hole in the strike zone and your hot and cold zones, where your holes are. None of these are secrets anymore because the data is there. So you got to figure out ways to grade yourself daily on things that actually matter. And that seemed to help them. They've been doing that for I think 3 weeks now. And, I can just tell by talking to them in between, the mindset that they have is like a trending upward type of mindset, because they're focused on something that they can actually control, which is like making sure the ball hits the barrel of the bat, which is, the key point to the competition.
And even to what you're saying, I know some people are probably like, oh, this is just one guy's perspective. And I think that this is more of like, this is almost everybody that plays in the big leagues perspective and that does it for a long time. I just watched a video like last week on Barry Bonds, and he said he never worried about if it was an out, a single, a line out. It was him versus the pitcher. And the pitcher just
Mhm.
happened to have eight other guys helping him out. And
Mhm.
so he knew if he hit the ball hard every single time, that eventually those numbers would be more on his side than the pitchers, no matter if he had eight guys behind him or not. So I think, again, to your point, talking about Miguel Cabrera, we're talking about Barry Bonds here, right? Best hitter in my generation, being a little older than you, has that same mindset where he didn't even look at anything but I'm going to hit this ball square. If I hit this ball square as much as possible, I'm going to be as successful as possible. So if those guys are carrying the same thing, I think obviously this is a recipe for success.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I could probably just tell story after story, but I used to sit in the hotel room with Nick Castellanos, and we would just talk baseball. And obviously, he's a hitter, and I'm a pitcher, and he's one of my best friends. And so we would dive into like mentality on and off the field, really. But we were just constantly talking about like, why do you think this guy's good, or this guy's really good at this, but why do we think that? And we would like try to dissect people and players together, kind of. But I'll never forget, and I wish he was here to tell the story too from his perspective. But he was grinding through a little slump, and so I knew that he knew that. We were talking about it, whatever. And one day I could tell he was really searching, and I was in the dugout, so I went up to him, I'm like, Nick, go to the plate right now and forget about how you normally hit, and just put the bat straight up and down like you're a little leaguer, and then just hit the ball as hard as you can. And he's like, you think that's gonna work? I'm like, just give it a shot. What's the worst thing that can happen? You're gonna punch out again? So just give it a chance. Like, you're a really good hitter, and you've always been just a natural raw hitter. You can hit just straight up and down and give me a chance. He's like, all right, I'm gonna do it this at bat. That I bet he hit a home run. And when he came around second base, I was at the top step like this, and he couldn't believe it, and I couldn't believe it either. But it just goes to show you that sometimes you get so caught up in like the baseball, right, where it's like everything's so mechanical that you forget the competition at hand. Um, so it's like, yeah, easy to say like, oh, just dumb it down and compete, but there's tricks to get your mind there, right? Where like Nick is obviously just an extremely good hitter, and I knew if he could turn his brain off, he'd hit because he can hit.
He's that talented.
Um, yeah, he's that talented. So again, like what I know that I can help players with is learning how to compete, and like figuring out the most powerful thing in the world, which is your brain, and then figuring out how to use the most powerful thing in the world in your advantage.
Shane, I want you to kind of go into some of the guys you've played with Derek Jeter, Cabrera, McCann, those are guys, and you kind of gave little snapshots.
Mhm.
McCann was the best of this, Jeter was the best of this, Cabrera was the best of this, because whenever any of us talk about it, that have coached baseball, that have coached high level players, play with high level players, whenever we like ask questions like, oh, what was this guy the best at, right? Usually we don't ever talk about something within baseball. It's usually something
Right.
quality that's transferable to other things. So I've heard you say some of the stuff. So kind of ramble off McCann, Jeter, Cabrera, those guys,
Um,
Scherzer.
yeah. Well, I spent the most time in Detroit, so I was around Miggy like the longest out of everybody because Verlander got traded and Price got traded. But the thing that I can't stress enough about Miguel is everyone, even like ESPN, they all think he's like the class clown, right? He's like untucking the guy's shirt at first base or like whatever, right? But he has time to do that because the game is so slow to him. Like he's already analyzed everything and then boom, now he's just in the moment. He's untucking the jerseys. What people aren't talking about is how he's already analyzed the infield and who's hitting, and then he's telling the coach at the top step who just told the shortstop to take 2 steps over that he's wrong and he needs to go the other way. So it's like those are the things that people aren't seeing that that he doesn't get enough credit for. And again, his hitting speaks for itself. But then you have guys like Jeter, who was, a robot. I could tell you what time of day or where he's going to be depending on what time of day it is when at the field. Uh, Brian McCann was just like when you think of a gamer or in today's terms, like a dog, Brian McCann's dog. Like he had the thing as a catcher where he put his fingers down, you just believed it. Like you believed that it was the right pitch, whether it was or not. And that's like you can't coach that. That's like a thing that you just have or you don't have, you know. Um, Guys like Verlander, he was the guy that or he is the guy that has a plan and is going to stick to his plan until the plan is proven wrong. And by plan I mean like scouting report, right? Where like if you watch him pitch and you see him throw one pitch, you're probably going to see him throw that pitch 10 more times to that guy. Like he is not going to get off the plan. That's why he's the best. Obviously, he's got good stuff, but he has a process into where he has the plan to get to his scouting report to then make that into an actual plan in game and then stick to it, right? And then you got, you know, uh, Freddie Freeman, right? Where it's like, who else do you want at the plate with the game on the line?
Yeah.
Freddie Freeman. And what does he not do that all these other hitters in the world do right now? Care about launch angle and care about, lifting the ball. Like if you just watch him swing, he fouls off the most pitches ever. He's still got like the old school just get the bat to the ball thing. And that's why in the big moments he's successful because you can tell like he obviously has his thing and he has his swing that he works on in the cage, but in game, he's just competing, man. If he fouls a pitcher off 3 or 4 times in an at bat, he's gonna go yard. And
And
that's
that's,
just the
and
way it
that's the
is.
hardest thing for any competitor, but especially these kids. Like they're worried about half the kids are worried about, somebody tweeting about them. Is there a college coach in the stand?
Yeah.
Hey, my mom or my dad, are they filming my at bat right now? And like, hey, that ball wasn't a strike. My favorite thing is kids say like, oh, I struck out, but the third strike was, it was a foot outside the zone. And I always ask them,
Yeah,
well, what about the first two? Because they
yeah,
didn't
or by
even.
or the other way around. I mean, the deal with the umpires is no matter what level you're at, you're gonna think they suck. So you
Yeah.
got to get over it. Like they get better as you get better, but as a competitor, you're never going to agree with the umpire. If
But
you're
even to,
uh, uh, if you're a parent and you watch football on Sundays, how often do you see those referees throw a flag and you're like, not that's a should have been a no call. That's not pass interference. Those are the best referees in the world. So you're never gonna agree with the umpires. That's just the way it is. So dwelling on it now is gonna do nothing for you. It's actually a part of the game.
well,
It's unfortunate if you get screwed by one. It's extremely unfortunate, but what are you gonna do? Carry that into the next pitch? Now you're gonna get not like now you lost. You already lost because if the pitcher or vice versa, the hitter didn't carry it into the next pitch, they have an advantage.
That's what you're saying. All these other guys like Freeman and McCann, they're so convicted about what they can control and they are
Yeah,
competing that they're not worried about any of that stuff. Anything that gets in the way of competing is something that they just brush off.
Or the biggest
I'm
pet
like,
peeve I have is like, what about the kid that comes back? Oh, he just keeps throwing me curveballs. Throw me a fastball. He's scared. And it's like, oh, so like you think that a big leaguer's going back when he faces Justin Verlander and he throws him the shoulder high fastball that he can't hit over and over again. He's going
yeah,
back in the dugout saying, "Throw me this pitch." He's scared. No, it's called a plan. So you need to adjust. But instead, it's your
yeah.
first sign I know a kid's weak-minded at that for that day is when he comes in complaining that a pitcher's only throwing him X, Y, or Z and he's getting out every time. It's like, well, what would you do if you were on
Yeah,
the other side?
pay attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, you
And
know,
that's a whole nother thing too. Like, what are we paying attention to during the game? If he only threw you curveballs first at bat and you punched out swinging at all three of them, let's try sitting on the curveball second at bat, maybe. I mean, I'm no hitter, but that's what I would do,
Yeah.
you know? And
so
instead of complaining that that's all you're getting, give them a reason not to throw you one, right? So it's again, it's changing the perspective, changing the mindset. And at a young age, it's very easy to have an excuse for anything and everything, right? Especially in today's world with social media and everything else. It's like, you know, if I struck out, it's not my fault. Oh, I flew out. Well, it's not my fault. It's whatever, right? It's like it's cool if it's not my fault. So I'm still cool at least.
and a lot of the concepts we're talking about, right? The simplicity that comes with them, right? Everyone is kind of hearing, and just it's something that I try to remind players all of the time is that the best of people that are the best at whatever they do in whatever their field is, athletics, whatever they do for a living, they're the master of whatever the basics is of that industry, right?
Hmm.
Simplicity just about always wins, right? Occam's razor is a ancient old type of philosophy talking about that simple is just about always the right answer. And as much as we're talking about a lot of generic things and finding the simplicity in them, okay. And it sounds like, oh, well, I can just have this conversation with my kid. It's not going to hit the same, right? Because, and then also the amount of questions that Shane asks whenever he has worked with people it's something that honestly I'm on the other end of the spectrum for. I usually kind of give a lot of knowledge when really I need to start asking more questions to allow the answers to kind of come to them organically. That's the thing that I think that I have appreciated and been most impressed with Shane is that I've seen him have been a part of these conversations with him with some of these players, whether it's the minor league players, some college guys, a few high school guys when he's spending his time at Windermere. And I'll be like, hey, he just asked 10 questions in a row, and you can see the kid just kind of like it's hitting him so much better than anything I could have ever told him. Right. And then parents, we'll just call it what it is. If there's any of the parents that are on this call, me and Eric and Jesse say all the time, one of the biggest values we bring is we're not mom or dad, right? We can say the same thing that you've told your kid 10 or 15 times, especially when it pertains to baseball. And they're going to listen differently when it comes to me, Eric, Jesse, one of their high school coach, whatever it might be. That's an all-star jersey sitting behind Shane right there, right? You know what I'm saying? And it's a big leaguer that can resonate with the kids because I think the main difference here isn't that these high school players that jump into this program are going to be able to get mentored by somebody with Shane's professional baseball resume, but he wasn't the prospect. He knows what it's
Hmm.
like. If your kid isn't getting recruited right now and isn't a prospect and isn't travel ball famous and isn't getting any attention, he can relate because he didn't get any of that attention. He barely played, right? So it's not like he was this big prospect that was getting invited to all these all-American things under the sun and he doesn't know what it's like to be the under the radar guy or any of that stuff. So Shane,
Hmm.
I just kind of want you, I think it'd be important for them to hear, right? How you can resonate with your story, right? Of a 15, a 16, a 17-year old, whether it's never being the guy, always being the one that is kind of not getting his name called. And then also, if you want to touch in on the social media thing, right? Because that's just exploded over the last 10 years. And obviously, your experiences on managing kind of the ups and downs of social media.
Yeah, well, the social media part, I experience social media differently probably than the kid is in a sense that I was in the major leagues when I was really experiencing it. And when you pitch the ninth inning in the major leagues and you don't do your job, the team loses slash the city loses, and people are not very happy about that. So you get, death threats to, I hope your mom dies to, the craziest DMs you could ever imagine, like people commenting on my pictures, whatever. Um, so you got to learn how to deal with that. You got to learn how to block the noise, right? And you like easier said than done for sure, right? So, I can help figure out how can we block the noise, right? Um, but I think the biggest thing is at the youth level with social media is like nobody's posting their days when they struck out 4 times. Nobody's posting the infield hits. They're only posting the doubles, they're only posting the homers. You can't try to relate to that. You can only like I literally have it tattooed on my arm. It says allow your journey to be your strength. You're the only person that lives your journey. So let's just do that and then make that your strength, right? So whether you're the best player on the field when you're 15 or the worst player on the field when you're 15, you're not going to be in the big leagues for another 8 to 10 years. So none of this like success in this moment matters that much. So we have to create a foundation, which is going to be here to then build the home that you can live in forever. And if you're just out there like with no foundation, just playing and then like looking up to the other player or even looking down to the other player, you're building nothing. You're just kind of along for the ride and hoping for the best. But eventually you have to like actually start to put something together, and you have to learn who you are as a person and then who you are as a player. And then once you can figure out who you are as a player, you can then learn like what's making you tick. Like when I am my best player, what am I thinking? What am I doing? How am I thinking that? How am I doing that? And then navigating that stuff. Just going out there and playing. I mean, Brian, you were a gamer. You were a dog. I watched it with my own 2 eyes, right? And I learned from that, but like I didn't try to be you. I wasn't you. I couldn't be you. And if I was trying to be you, then I wasn't being myself, and then I was gonna suck anyways. So like my biggest goal with the young player is to like the voice that's in their head on and off the field. Who is that voice? What's that voice saying? And let's get it to be yourself and then say the right things.
That was the piece I was going to ask you, kind of this flip framework that we've been kind of throwing out there, the L being level the volume, right? And kind of
Yeah.
in their head. I think, and, I think Eric would kind of agree that our biggest battle as coaches is getting these players to understand what to think, how to perceive things, because that voice inside of their head is usually their biggest enemy, right? And is the
Hmm.
biggest reason why players go up and down. And if you just kind of want to go quickly into kind of your volume narrative.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of two things, but most of the time, especially younger player, it's like the try hard, like the want to be good, right? And so then you're trying so hard, or you're swinging so hard, and like you're like over focused, or I don't really know how to explain it other than like the try hard. You can see it as the parent or the coach. You can see when the player is like trying too hard. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That is that is like being in your car with the music on and the volume as loud as it can go, where like you can hear the music, but the speakers are rattling because it's a little too loud. And if you just turn the volume down a little bit, the speakers stop rattling and it's just as loud, right? So like trying to figure out that on the field to make your speakers, stop rattling will allow you to get the most out of you as a player. And then like again, easier said than done. You have to figure out like the tools that you need to then lower that volume, because you can't just be like, "Oh, okay, I'll try less." Well, no, you have to try, right? So how do we get the volume to actually lower, and still be Yeah.
Hey, you can use me as an example, right? For those of you guys that know me at all,
Your volume was way too high.
way too high. Way too high, right? And
Let's-
honestly, that's why I was a very inconsistent player, and it was because of that. And try to tell players all the time, like up until the last 37 games of my college career, basically from high school to through college, there was days I looked like I was a draft pick, and there was days I looked like you couldn't get me off the field faster, and there wasn't a lot in between, right? And Shane, you're nodding your head. You saw me for all those years, right? And my last 37 games of my career, I finally figured out how to control the volume while still playing with the intensity and tenacity that made me the player. But the speakers weren't rattling to where I could actually control my performance.
for
And
sure.
that's not something I figured out until I was about to watch my career end from the bench. And I just
Hmm.
wasn't allowing that to happen. And thankfully that I figured it out at that point. Um, but man, if there's one thing I can do that I think would have changed the longevity of my career, it would have been that right there. And I don't think that I obviously didn't learn it organically on my own until the very end of it. If I would have had somebody that would have really just hammered me about the volume piece earlier, I think I would have played a lot longer and played at some levels that I didn't get the opportunity to play at. I don't have any regrets on it. But when I
Hmm.
look back on it, I don't look back on anything other than if this would have been better, if my perspective would have been better, if my management of the successes and failures would have been better, then I would have gotten more out of the ability that I had. And that is, in essence, everything that we're trying to do with this program.
I was the
Like,
opposite. I had to learn how to turn my volume up without turning it too loud, right? Because like I'm a very like laid back, like super low heart rate. It takes me a while to get going. So I had to how I learned the volume thing was I figured out I needed to turn my volume up, but then I realized it was way too loud because I was just like, if I can just turn it up, I was just turning it up as fast as I could and as loud as I could. And then I was like, I don't have any control of anything. Maybe I need to turn it back down. So like I was constantly battling the not too much and then the way too much. And then figuring out, okay, when I think this, my volume is here. And then when I think this, my volume is here. And then when I do this before the game, my volume, you know? So like navigating these other things and realizing how it affected my volume is where I finally figured out like exactly where I needed to be to be the best version of myself when on the mound.
I think that's the unique opportunity, and I think that's why this came up for us to be able to put this together. Is I got to see it firsthand at Windermere, and even a little bit at Apopka, honestly, when you were there earlier on in your career. Is that because of the things that you've been through, you have the unique ability, the way since we're using the volume, each player basically has a different remote, right? So like it's not like one standard remote that you would get,
Mhm.
and every if I hit this button on every player, it's going to work, right? So you have the unique ability to be able to find that right remote that works with that player. And I've seen it happen with hitters. I've seen it happen with pitchers at Windermere. I'm seeing it happen right now with the minor leaguers that you're talking to. And I just think that this is a tremendous opportunity because I don't think there's anybody in high school right now that knows where their volume should be. Whether
No.
they're really good and super successful or they are up and down and struggle like Dempsey said, there's always room to improve your mental game. And it would be crazy for somebody not to take this opportunity and have to listen to their son say what Demps just said. Man, I figured it out the last 37 games of my senior year in college. And
Mhm.
because of that, I probably didn't get another opportunity. And that's not something we want to hear from our players. 10 years down the road or 4 more years down the road, those guys that are about to graduate. So we want to give them that opportunity to find that now and not have to have those same thoughts that, myself and Dempsey both had, mine in different reasons, but uh, still something I had no idea at the time how much better I could have been if I could control that. And I had nobody to talk to. I had nobody to look up to figure that out. And you've been through it all, seen it all, and I've seen you do it with multiple players, with multiple kind of different scenarios.
Well, piggyback off that for a second. For the parents, it's like how many times, even as or for the kid, it doesn't matter, I guess. But like, how many times as a parent do you know like what your kid's up to because you were a kid once? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's like what I'm trying to do for a baseball player. Like like you said, like I've tried it all because that's how I figured out what worked for me. But two, I've kind of I went through like I don't have a job right now. I was an all-star 3 years ago, and I haven't really had a job since I was an all-star. So like I've constantly been at the top or at the bottom and like navigating in between. So I think that um largest strength is basically what you said is like figuring out how to relate to the player based off of what they're going through in this moment because chances are I've already been through it, you know.
And
So
if
it's
not,
like
you've seen somebody else go through it.
yeah, and every time I have a conversation with a younger baseball player at any level, when I'm done having the conversation, I'm like extremely like motivated, and that's how I know that I'm extremely passionate about what's going on with baseball players right now because I've spent the last 3 years in AAA and I've seen the young players come up through the system and get there, and I know what they're talking about during the game or in the bullpen or after the game or before the game. Like I hear the baseball conversations, and nobody's teaching this stuff anymore because the iPads got involved. It's even harder. Like the iPads weren't involved when I was coming up, and it was still difficult to get that kind of coaching. Now that the iPads are involved, it's impossible. There's nobody's talking about it.
And for those wondering
Every
what iPads involved means, that's, all the data, the metrics, the spin rates, the exit
yeah,
velos, all of those things.
yeah. Like I was quick story, double A. I got called into the manager's office and they told me that my slider wasn't going to be good enough at the major league level
For
because
this.
it didn't have enough vertical drop. And I knew that my slider was my best pitch because it was the only pitch I ever threw when the shit hit the fan, right? So, and it was the pitch that got me to double A, and I was dominating that year. And then they told me that I wasn't going to be good enough at the next level. But because I had been through what I had already been through, uh, and, you know, I believed in myself, essentially, I said, with all due respect, when the hitters start telling me that, I'll change it. But right now, it's my best pitch. And now that they have TrackMan and they have all these other things, they're actually teaching people how to throw my slider, and they're calling it a sweeper. But back then, they didn't call it a sweeper. It just was it didn't have enough depth back then. But then they figured out hitters gonna hit it, and now they teach it to everybody, and they call it a whirly or a sweeper or whatever they're calling it, right? So it's like again, whatever the player is going through, I've probably went through it. Um, I used to walk 10 guys an inning and then I stopped walking 10 guys an inning. Then I started walking guys a lot again and I've started and I've relieved. And most of my best friends in pro ball were all position players. So I spoke to them about what was going on in the box and what they were thinking hitting wise. Uh, so I know that I can help. I
And
can't stress that enough.
And for the sake of time, those of you that if players that are coming back from an injury or parents, your kids are going through an injury, or if you've ever kind of witnessed someone come back from it, um, can't tell you how many times me and Eric and Jesse have seen it over the years. When a guy comes back from injury, man, you never know what emotional state they're going to be in. They're so amped and ready to be out there, and then they do too much, and then they get disappointed. The injury happens again, right? Shane, like any professional athlete that's an overhand thrower, right? He's from Tommy John to a blister that looked like your finger exploded to nerve stuff to everything in between. I know you've rehabbed stuff, you've done different things. So obviously going through that journey is something that Shane can 1,000% resonate with. And, like I said, for the sake of time, we'll kind of leave that as a little nugget for him to kind of go into at another time we do one of these, or for any of the players that are going through that and sign up for this. There was a question that came in there. They just kind of asked, can Shane hit on the mental approach in practice and training compared to games to be able to perform when it matters? The 5 o'clock hitter, right?
Yeah,
The guy that throws the no hitter in the bullpen.
that is essentially that's what this whole program is about. Realistically, because you have to train to get better, and then the competition is the test, right? So, um, what I'll say is that most baseball players have a difficult time getting out of training mode when in competition. So like that's literally what I'm here to do, is to get you to understand why you can't get out of training mode, and then how to get into compete mode, right? Because if you're going to fight Mike Tyson, okay, you've been training for 6 months to fight Mike Tyson, and then you get in the ring and you're fighting Mike Tyson and you're thinking about how you're going to throw your punches. Mike Tyson is going to knock you out, because guess what he's not thinking about? How he's going to throw his punches. Okay. But if you go in there and fight for your life because you trust your training, you got a chance. Probably not a great chance because it's Mike Tyson, but you got a chance, right? So that's the whole thing. If I'm in the box and I'm worried about having my A swing, I'm no longer worried about hitting the baseball that's coming at me at 90 miles an hour, right? So like you got to figure out how to separate the two. You work on your A swing when you're working on your A swing, but in competition, you're now in the ring with Mike Tyson. Now you're fighting for your life. And how do we get you into the mindset that you are now fighting for your life? Because again, it's easier said than done. Like, oh, go compete. I mean, how many times as a parent have you told your kid, go compete today? Just compete, have fun, compete. Yeah, well, it's not, like go out there and they strike out the first AB swinging and missing. Now they're thinking that they're swung and missed because they didn't have their A swing, right? And so now their second AB, they're just thinking about their A swing, where that's why I'm here.
And that's where the dialogue right after the moments in the game that we hear as coaches here in the dugout or parents, whatever your kid talks about after the game, is what says whether he was fighting for his life or not. Because he comes and he talks about the umpire strike zone or the coach made this wrong decision. You're not fighting for your life, because when you're fighting for your life, you don't even recognize those pieces
Uh-uh.
of the puzzle, right? And I
Yep.
can just tell you some of the best competitors that we have ever had. I can remember being in Jupiter when we made the first really big run and lost the championship, and we were losing 8-0 to a team that we're actually very good friends with in the playoffs. And in the first inning, we punched out the first two hitters of the game, and those two guys walked by me in the dugout and said, "He's really good, but I'm going to get his ass by the end of the day." Right? And weird, we come back later in that game when an 8-run deficit and we win the game. And one of those two players is one of the ones that actually hit a 3-run double, okay, win a 3-2 count and 2 outs, and us one strike away from losing, right? That's what those guys came back with. Those were and that's why that group were, because we had winners. Because when the game started, that's what they said when they struck out. That guy's good, but I'm going to get his ass. Not anything else other than that. And if we
So it
can,
wasn't that their elbow was doing this or that
yes,
this was doing that.
or hey, that guy, and they don't start glazing the guy and start saying
Yeah.
this and talking about where he's committed and this, that. That's not the conversations that were going on in that dugout. And that's the thing, is that, like, in that big Jupiter event, we go and we basically take our best competitors that we feel we can go win. And that's why we go and do that. But if what our goal is to be, if we could get every one of our players to understand how to fight for their life and compete when the game happens and not worry about all those other things, regardless of whatever their ability level is, they're gonna get the most out of them. We're gonna get the most out of them, and then we can do special things together on the field. But it all comes down to, is each player out there ready to fight for their life, or are they ready to worry about why the blame is elsewhere?
Hmm. It's like, if I'm facing Mike Trout, I don't need to know how good he is.
Mike
I
Trout.
know how good I know how good he is. And if you look up his numbers against me, you'll be like, yeah, well, he's pretty good against you too. But if I go out there thinking how good he is, then I got no chance, you know. And realistically, I probably still have no chance. He's got 3 at bats and 2 homers off me, but I was out there fighting for my life, I promise. He just
That's
he
my
just he just he
story.
just had he just happened to win those fights.
Shane, I remember your first year in the big leagues. I think it was your second start. It was in Baltimore, right? Was that right? You feel like six and
Yeah,
two-thirds. You had like 13 or
yeah.
14 punch outs. And
Seven,
Nelson,
seven and a third. So
got it. Okay. And Nelson Cruz was like one of the best hitters in baseball at that time. and you hat tricked him and you threw him about 15 sliders, okay, and he swung
Hmm.
and missed at about 9 of them, okay.
Hmm.
And I remember talking to you literally after the game, and I said, dude, you punched out Nelly 3 times. And you're like, who is that? Like, you had no idea. You didn't even know who I was. Like, Nelson Cruz, blah, blah. You literally had no idea who he was, right?
Hmm.
And then I remember once I started explaining what you did against him, you went, oh, the guy that didn't like the slider. Got it, right? And I bring that up because you just talked about fighting for your life. And this guy at
Yeah.
the time, Nelson Cruz, was literally one of the best 3 hitters in baseball that year. And you were so much actually doing what you are preaching because you had no
Yeah.
idea who he was, not only going into it, but then afterwards, you didn't care that, oh, wow, that guy was really good and I punched him out. You just knew you were competing. He didn't like the slider, so you kept
Yeah.
feeding it to him.
He didn't like it. That was the same slider they told me that wasn't going to be good enough, by the way.
So,
But
but
yeah, that's you know that's a part of what obviously I'll get into with pitchers, where it's like hitters have no names, they have no faces. As a hitter, pitchers have no names and have no faces. Like it's a fight, and um, like I got to the conclusion that it's a fight when I was in the ninth, pitching in the ninth inning, because that was when I really realized that it didn't matter. That was also when I came up with like the you can do everything right and still be the worst player on the field today, because I could go out there and throw the right pitch and locate it perfectly and still lose the game, and everyone in the city's mad at me. And I could go out there and hang three breaking balls and punch out the side, and everybody's excited, you know? So like figuring out how to handle that at the highest level in the biggest moment with the brightest lights, it's, you know, it's the name of the game. It is the game.
everyone's probably just curious about, hey, well, what does it cost to do all this stuff? We are doing very special pilot pricing for this. Okay. For the first 10 people who register for this program, we'll get this very special pilot pricing. As you can imagine, if I was, anyone off the street was to ask you what would you expect, one-on-one direct mentorship with an MLB All-Star or a professional athlete of any kind of be, you probably expect it'd be a pretty healthy price point. Probably, a lot of people, I know people that kind of do this, Shane, guys like JR, guys like that.
Hmm.
I mean, they're charging what, $500 a 30-minute session for a big leaguer, right? To kind of do
Hmm.
this type of work. Okay. The special pilot pricing is actually going to be $200 a month. And this first level is going to be 6 months worth of it, right? So, it's $200 a month. You're going to get, your son's going to have direct messaging access to Shane. There'll be a parent intro call because there is a parent side to this. There's a player intro call. Then every player will also get 3 1-on-ones calls, and then there'll be 3 group calls that they'll be able to get to. So all of that for one blanket, $200 a month. A lot of you guys pay triple that for hitting lessons or pitching lessons. I can tell you that this is a way more, not only premium service, but something that's going to have way more impact on a player's career, and that's coming from somebody who's had a facility offering instruction for 10 years, right? I'm not afraid to say that. So once again, the first 10 people that register are going to get this special pilot pricing. It's $200 a month for them to directly work with Shane. So if anybody has any questions that want to kind of talk further about it offline, either feel free to reach out to us at info@powerbsb.com, send us an email, and then somebody is more than happy to get on the phone, answer your questions, and kind of walk you through and navigate the rest. So do you guys have any closing statements with this?
And I'll start
Last.
and I'll let Shane go last. Like I said before, this is something that I wish I had when I was younger. It's something I wish my players had access for the last 15 years coaching high school baseball. Um, and it's something that I actually still utilize. Shane can speak to it. I talk to him all the time about all kinds of different things mentally, because this stuff goes outside of baseball. So that's why I think it's really important. It's not just to make your son a better baseball player, but learning how to talk to yourself positively and put yourself in the right mindset is important for anything you do in life. So I know that I'm currently using it myself. So I would highly recommend it to any player, baseball or not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess finishing for me, it's just I can't stress enough how passionate I am about helping young players. based off of my last 3 or 4 years playing, I've realized how much it means to me to teach somebody something that it took me, you know, essentially 17 years to learn. Uh, so if I can simplify it and translate it in a way to where it impacts a player at the age of 18 that I didn't learn until I was 5 years in the big leagues, I think that it's only going to show on the field, um, in their play, and then even off the field, man, because the game of baseball teaches you so much because of the failures, and learning how to deal with those failures will then, translate to dealing with the failures in life because you know, you're not going to win every single day, although the mentality is to find wins every single day. So, again, my biggest thing is just I hope that you guys understand that, uh, like, I am here because I'm passionate about it. This is something that I want to do, and I want to help, and I want to be on the team, and I know I can help. So looking forward to the opportunity to basically prove myself, because this is just another situation where, like, potentially I'm the underdog, right? And the value may not be seen at first, but it will be.